So it's very cold out here today. And the past several days, we've been experiencing some very cold weather in many parts of the U.S. Unseasonably, at least in terms of the last several years, cold. I mean, we haven't had these negative kind of nights for quite a few years. So everybody's talking about it. And one of the things that I always see happen when we get a cold snap in the United States, especially in the East and the Northeast, is fossil fuel apologists coming out of the woodwork, letting us know why a transition to sustainable energy is not possible, and why our virtue signaling, hippy dippy, greeny ambitions are junk and belong in the trash can, you know. I'm just going to basically explain here why they are full of shit. Why they are trying to deceive you. They're trying to make you feel doubtful, make you be distracted, make you be uncertain about the idea of sustainable energy. So let's get started here. I have 4 articles up on the screen. 3 of them are from Forbes, but they're written by various individuals. And the first one here, the headline is "Renewables Meet Reality. Fuel Oil Still a Problem in New England." And this was from like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Written by a person named Ariel Cohen. Ariel Cohen is a DC-based contributor who covers energy and security. He was involved in the Heritage Foundation and various think tanks that traditionally have been supportive of the fossil fuel industry. Then we have this article from shaledirectories.com, and it's written by Jim Willis, who is editor and publisher of Marcellus Drilling News. His headline is "Fuel Oil Saves the Day for New England Virtue Signalers." What's wrong with that headline? I mean, you can just smell the smug coming off of this headline, right? Like it's like antimatter and matter coming together and annihilating each other, right? It's evident of the fact that we are faced with a big culture war on this subject. And it's very frustrating for somebody who's looked at this stuff for 20 years and pound my fist against the table all the time because people just don't understand the science and engineering behind it. But the reality of it is these guys are in the business of producing fossil fuels. And anything that competes with that is viewed as a threat. So let's just keep going here. New England's clean energy transition seems heavy on fuel oil. We're going to see how heavy it really is in a bit here. ISO New England pumps up the fuel oil again during winter storm. This was from 2022, Winter Storm Elliott. Okay, so it seems like these articles are all focused on one singular concept. That, number one, in the region of New England, which has certain cultural stereotypes associated with it, that makes it easy to pick on. Number 2, the use of fuel oil to generate electricity during certain weather events. Okay, so those 2 things are colliding together. And the idea that this region is somehow unique in its approach to sustainable energy, which we're going to find out there's nothing stellar about it versus other parts of the country. So let's just go to this website here, which is Grid Status. Grid Status tells us data about the various electric grids in the country, and they're showing us data from ISO New England and the fuel mix on their system. This pink ribbon here is the fraction of electricity being generated from fuel oil in New England on January 21st. And you can see here that at certain parts of the day, like right here, it was actually the biggest fuel source. 31.3% of the power was coming from oil. Okay, and if you look at this, if you're fed this chart, or if you are somebody like this, David Blackman here, who is a Texas-based policy analyst for the oil and gas industry, and he shows you a screenshot of New England's electricity fuel mix on a certain hour of the day, on a certain day, and you can see the fraction of oil is 24%, and this was, I think this is 3 years old, and we can see here the other day that it was 31%. You might be under this idea like, wow, man, those guys are all up there, they're all full of shit when they talk about having clean energy and renewable energy and an energy transition stuff, right? You know? Man, this is crazy. Most of us who understand electric grids in terms of, you know, the normal fuel mix know that oil makes up a really, really, really small part of the fraction of energy that's produced for electricity in a year, pretty much everywhere in the country. Oil is not a resource that we like to use a lot for power because it's costly. It's very expensive. You know, you go to a gas station, I mean, this is basically diesel fuel or heating oil. You go to a gas station and you look at the price of diesel fuel. That's effectively what this is, minus the road taxes, right? If you have heating oil in your house, you're paying $2 and something a gallon. That's what this is. And they're burning this in large quantities to produce electricity for certain periods of time. And we might be under this impression that this whole energy transition idea is a big smokescreen, you know, because we're fed this data. Let's go back a few days. Like to here. You don't see the pink anymore, right? What happened to it? I mean, where'd it go? I mean, they're still generating 11 gigawatts. I mean, we only need like 15 to 20% more power, but yet they're using all this oil, and they weren't using it before. What gives? You know, where did it go? What we can see here is that there is an interplay between the blue category and the pink category. The blue category is natural gas. So these individuals up here are trying to tell us that fuel oil is somehow related to renewable energy. It's somehow related to wind power and solar power specifically. They're trying to put a notion in our brains that fuel oil is being burned because New England wants to use wind power and solar power. When the evidence is quite obviously that the fuel oil is replacing natural gas on certain days. Right? One fossil fuel is competing with another fossil fuel. It's not because of wind turbines and solar panels. The other side of it is this person right here is telling us that natural gas and nuclear are the way that New England should be looking to get rid of this fuel oil rather than renewable energy, rather than wind power, solar power. Interesting, right? Let's start with nuclear. And we'll come back to natural gas. So if we go back to this site here, this green bar is nuclear. New England has 2 nuclear power stations with 3 reactors. Millstone 1 and 2 and Seabrook. Between the 3 reactors, they're putting out 3.3 gigawatts of electricity, right? If there's a polar vortex, does this nuclear change at all? Do they have like a knob where they can like pull the control rods out and create more electricity from Millstone and Seabrook? No, they don't. The nuclear power plants have absolutely no basis on dispatchability during cold weather. All that they do is they just reduce they create headroom in the system. There's just power that they produce all the time and at the same rate, even in the middle of the spring when it's nice outside and people aren't really using any heating and cooling, these plants are producing the same amount of electricity. So if we decided we were going to build a nuclear reactor at Seabrook, make Seabrook unit number 2, and we were to add another 800 megawatts to this green category, what would it do? It would just go boop, and that line would just rise up a little bit. Do we think that that's going to help us reduce fuel oil usage during cold weather? Because it seems like these fossil fuel backers are worried about the fuel oil. They're worried about that we're using too much of their product, right? It seems like they're so concerned about burning fuel oil, even though they're involved in the industry that sells this stuff. What is it going to do? Let's just see here. If we go to this website, this is telling us New England ISO's annual fuel mix. So grid status is showing us the fuel mix at a given point in time, like every 5-minute intervals. This is showing us what was produced over the course of a year. We can see that the biggest source of electricity in ISO New England was 55% natural gas. The next biggest source was 24% nuclear. Fuel oil was 0.3%. So these people in these articles, and all of our virtue signaler, bashers, are worried about 0.3% of the fuel. They are basically making a mountain out of a molehill because their goal is to provide fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and to basically confuse people and create this notion that these technologies do nothing. The technologies of, say, wind power, solar power, do nothing for us. That is what they are trying to do. Over here in this article, I said that the person is promoting nuclear power. The path to zero emissions energy in New England remains uncertain. A significant barrier achieving these states' green goals is the reluctance to integrate nuclear power into the energy mix as we advance. Interesting, right? The reluctance to integrate nuclear power. We hear this time and time and time again from fossil fuel apologists. If you dumbass liberal hippie greenies would just accept nuclear power, you'd solve your problem, right? That attitude is pervasive in the world. What's the problem with it? The problem is there is nobody out there willing to build nuclear power plants. There has been this much talk about nuclear power plants being constructed in the United States in the last 25 years, and there have been this many built. The only ones that we've succeeded in building was Vogtle 3 and 4, and it took $35 billion and 15 years of construction. And in the meantime, all the while those two nuclear power reactors were being constructed, we expanded wind power and solar power to the point where renewables now meet 25% of the electricity load in the US. More than all of the renewables produce more electricity than the entire fleet of nuclear power plants that have been in existence for 5 decades. So when people like this say things What they are trying to do is produce fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and they're trying to stir up a culture war argument that basically gives people this impression that the people promoting renewable energy are stupid, that they're idiots, that they are ignoring nuclear power because they're afraid of it. No, we're choosing the energy technology that gives us the most megawatt hours for the least amount of money in the least amount of time. And that is proven to be solar PV and wind. Nuclear is nothing more than a political football. Okay? And this guy is then promoting natural gas, saying that we need things like pipelines and all this stuff, all right? So he's going to promote nuclear, he's going to promote natural gas. What would nuclear do? Let's just say that New England decides, well, we are going to build a nuclear power plant, and in 2035 it comes online, right? And let's just assume that nothing else gets, they say, fuck the wind and the solar, and we're going to build nuclear. And this green line goes up here. What is that going to do? Do you think it's going to push wind off the system? It's going to push solar off the system? It's going to push refuse off the system? Or wood or hydropower? No. It's going to push natural gas off the system. Why do we hear people who are effectively fossil fuel apologists promoting nuclear so much, when we know that the market share of natural gas would be consumed by any nuclear power plant that ever gets constructed? Because they know that we're not going to build those nuclear power plants. All these nuclear power plants that we're talking about, if any of them ever get built, it will be in 10 to 15 years before they generate their first watt of electricity. And in those 10 to 15 years, you can sell a lot of fuel, specifically natural gas. So I'm sitting here today basically telling you that we have a polar vortex going on, right? And we can be brought to this website and we see that fuel oil is being used for 30% of the power. And unless we understand the engineering issues behind that, we might be looking at this like we've made no progress. We're not achieving what our goal is, right? And we have these people who are basically telling us this dirty, ugly fuel oil is being used in massive quantities, and all these greeny, hippy, dippy people in New England think that it's all wind turbines and solar panels, right? And they neglect to show us the fact that over the course of a year, oil is only 0.3% of the load. Okay, so I'm thinking about this as an engineer. You know, I am not going to build enough capacity to meet enough wind capacity or enough pipeline capacity or enough nuclear capacity just because you get a polar vortex every 10 years that causes spikes in demand for energy. It would be a waste of my capital to do that. And the effect that it gives the environment is negligible. I do not care if for 4 days in January you have to switch from gas to oil to fire the combined cycle plants because you fuel through the pipeline is constrained, when over the course of a year I'm only using that for 0.3% of my megawatt hours. It does not matter. And everybody needs to understand that it's perfectly acceptable to rely on fire for contingencies, especially when those contingencies are so small in the grand scheme of things. And we can't be distracted by people whose goal it is to continue selling us burnable material that we just burn all the time because we're led to believe that the technologies that are being promoted are junk and aren't worth our investment. So I always struggle with conversations about things like solar power. All right, let's give a very easy example. I have solar power on my house, and I talk about it, and some people ask me the question, what do you do at night? And I tell them, I do the same thing you do at night. I buy electricity from the utility. And they will be like, well, how's that green, right? And I'm just like, well, because during the day, I'm not buying electricity from the utility. I am actually selling excess back to the utility. It is no different when you scale it up to the size of a region. Every watt hour that comes off of a wind farm or a solar farm means gas you don't have to burn. Right? This New England, which is one of the lowest penetration of renewables grids in the United States, has 12% renewables. Solar's 4%, wind's 3%, refuse 2%, wood 2%, landfill 0.3%. Look at this. Landfill gas provides more energy into New England than oil over the course of a year. And these dudes are all telling us how, look at all this oil, oh my God, on a cold day. It doesn't matter. It's not important. Because you have to use it for a few hours or a few days in the wintertime. It's peanuts. It's insignificant. And in this case, it has absolutely nothing to do with wind power and solar power, and everything to do with the fact that they can't push enough natural gas up there to fire the combined cycles on natural gas. The interesting thing, if we go back in history, we go back into the 2000s and the 1990s, this oil number, instead of being 0.3%, was probably in the 20s. So even though fossil fuel apologists are writing article after article every time there's a winter storm about New England using fuel oil to generate electricity, they are forgetting history. And all that they are trying to do is create fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and basically try to come up with this notion that there is this notion of contradiction and hypocrisy around the people who want the energy transition, who want to burn less stuff. So that's effectively the story here. The situation is that these guys talk about, well, they need more nuclear, they need more natural gas. Well, those are already the biggest resources on the system. You know, I remember back in the 2000s, there was this organization called ABEC, Americans for Balanced Energy Choices, and they were all hyped up over the idea of renewable energy competing with coal. And they came out with this big PR program. They ran ads on TV, and they said, we need a balanced energy portfolio. And I'm like, balanced, huh? Well, coal is already producing 52% of the electricity, so it sounds like you guys need to be reduced somewhat in order for us to have a balanced portfolio. It is mind games. It is a way for people to continue selling us stuff to light on fire. The other side of this is people will often tell me, like, well, if you do all this wind power and solar power, they're going to generate a bunch on nice days, and then the power plants are going to have to shut down, and they're not going to be able to make as much money, and they're going to go out of business and all this stuff. I'm like, okay. We can look at capacity factors for fossil fuel power stations from EIA, and we can see that natural gas-fired gas turbine plants only run at 8.3% capacity factor. And that's been the case since 2013. Actually, the capacity factor of those has increased. How about petroleum, which is the New England controversy here? Petroleum-fired gas turbines have gone from 0.9% in 2013 to 1.3% in 2023. So in 10 years, it's actually increased. Petroleum-fired steam turbines have dropped a little bit, 10%. But these power plants have been surviving on 12.9, 2.1% capacity factors long before the energy transition became a hot topic. So this notion that these plants can't survive because they aren't going to generate as much when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining is abject bullshit. The people who suffer are the coal burners, right? These guys over here, and most of that is because they were at 59% in 2013. Now they're at 42%. Natural gas combined cycle was at 48%. Now they're at 59%. Much of their market share was taken not from wind and solar farms, but from natural gas power plants. And everybody talks about the war on coal. The war on coal was because of fracking and better gas turbines. That's where their capacity went, their runtime. Natural gas turbines, natural gas steam turbines, they all have increased in capacity factor, meaning that despite the growth of renewable energy from 5% to 25% over the last 2 decades, they've enjoyed more runtime. Your intuition would say it would be the opposite, and that they'd lose money and they'd shut down, they'd have to retire, and the grid would be stuck with up a creek without a paddle on a cold day, right? It seems like there's a lot of headroom in the system whenever you've got power plants that are only running at 12 or 13% capacity factor. So I'm just trying to make sense of the people who are trying to fool you into believing that we don't know what we're doing in our energy transition. So that's basically it. We'll leave it at that. The reality of this is I do not care if you're using oil during a winter emergency, because over the grand scheme of things in a year, that's a drop in the bucket in your annual emissions of greenhouse gases and consumption of fuel. The only people who are here to complain are the people who are selling the fuel, right? Because the power generators, as we see, they are running more, except for coal. Everybody else is running more. And, that's basically it.